2 o'clock in the morning, his body time, to get him to various places, and I have worn him out in my car. If I could keep him here for one more week, I'd have my third PhD. So, thank you, Jim.
Thank you, Jimmy. I think I flipped that on. Did I flip that on? No. Okay. Let me see. I don't often have to wear 3 mics.
Very special.
Yeah. A lot of times. That sounds more like it now. A lot of times I don't need a mic at all because I have a fairly powerful voice. So I want to thank KFGC for inviting me here, Jimmy for being such a gracious host, and there ain't no way you can wear me out. All right? Just get over that notion. Some of you already know I am a UK alumni. 1980 is when I finished my graduate program at UK. And so every time I get to come back to Kentucky, it is a pleasure. There's a lot of people I know, a lot of places I know. I've been gone from here for over 40 years. No, 30. I don't know. 1980 to 2000 is 20 years. 2000 to 22 that makes 42 years. It's just hard to believe that it's been 42 years since I used to live here. But happy to be back, happy to be participating in the program. So what they asked me to talk about was extended grazing seasons and their role in profitable livestock operations. So because the word profitable is in there, and thank God the economist left so I can say all kinds of nonsensical stuff now, we're going to start out, talking about what are the drivers of profitability in, cattle, sheep production. Since I've lived in the West for almost 19 years now, I usually find myself saying ranch, instead of farm or whatever. So it's what drives profitability. And there's a lot of things, we can think about, and people have their ideas of what are the important factors in determining profitability. Is it weaning weight? Is it feed costs? Is it weaning percentage? Is it your investment? Well, it's a little bit of all of those things, but there are some things that rise to the top, and we're going to sort through those. And I'm going to ask, has anyone ever heard the name Burke Teichert? All right. There's some people here who have. So Burke Teichert was anybody ever hear of the Deseret Ranch system? Okay, Deseret is the umbrella name for all the churches, all the ranches that are owned by the Mormon Church. And it is a lot. And they're all over the country. We're talking about tens of thousands of cows and hundreds of thousands of acres. And you might say, well, what does that have to do with me? I've got 110 acres and 32 cows. Profit is profit. And across small operations, big operations, it really comes down in the end to the same factors that are going to determine whether you're profitable in a large-scale or a small-scale operation. So Burke came up through the ranks of Deseret to become CEO of the entire operation. When I think about the top 5 ranch management minds in the United States, Burke Teichert is always in, that top group. And so Burke, I'm guessing that some of you have heard of him. It's from Beef Magazine. He had a regular column in Beef Magazine for a number of years. And one of the recurring themes he talked about were the keys to profitability. So this is Burke Teichert's list of the top 7 factors that drive profitability in ranching. Stocking rate. Now he thinks in terms, it's a ranch operation, it's all about the cow, right? No, it is not. Ranching is a land management business. Livestock are just incidental to the harvesting process. The hardest thing to change about the ranch is the terrain of that ranch, the soil that's underneath it, the climate where you live. The easiest thing to change about any ranch is the livestock on it. And in a place like Kentucky where there's sale barns all over, you literally can probably sell every animal off your farm one day, and the next day buy back a completely different bunch of animals. That is the easiest thing to change about a ranch. It's the animals that are on it. All right, so stocking rate, we think in terms of revenue per acre and return per acre, not revenue per head or return per head, because it's a land-based business. Fed feed versus grazed feed. The point has already been made by other speakers that it's a whole lot more expensive to feed your cattle or your sheep stored feed, hay, haylage, baleage, things like that, than it is to have them graze itself. So the relative number of days that you feed, stored feed, to the number of days that you graze is a major determinant of profit. There's been a number of assessments done that basically say the more hay you feed, the more money you will lose. The less hay you have to feed, the more money you will make. Cows per person, so this is labor efficiency. And I actually noticed, I've got a mistake in that. It says AUD is animal unit days. FTE is full-time employee. Now, yes, we could talk about AUDs per FTE, but it's really animal units, the number of animals that you can manage as an individual. So if you were to ask the state cow-calf extension specialist in Kentucky, and I don't, who is that these days? Is there one? Is it Jeff? You're the state cow-calf specialist? All right. Okay, so how many cows should a mom and pop operation be able to handle without any outside help? All right, he gives the "it depends" answer. However you want to think about it, man, just throw me a number, Jeff. He would say 150 to 200. If you ask a state cow-calf extension specialist out on the plains of the western U.S., they're going to say 500. Most of the successful ranchers that I work with and that I'm acquainted with on the plains and in the west and in the southeast would say 800. Deseret's expectation per employee is 1,000 to 1,200 animal units managed. The national standard in Australia is 1,500. The most successful stations in Australia, it's 3,000. That's the expectation of labor efficiency. Now, in Queensland, Australia, there is not even a concept of winter. There is no stored forage feeding. There is no hay making. The Australian's idea of assisting a cow having a difficult birth is BAM! Calf got pink eye and it's wandered into a muck hole. BAM! That's how you assist an animal in difficulty. Pretty hardcore for our sensitive nation where individual cows have sweet names like Bessie and Elsie and Megan or whatever. So, cows per person, that's important. What is your labor efficiency? Gross margin, for those of you who aren't familiar with economic terms, what gross margin is, it is the difference between the value of your product and the operating cost or variable cost to produce it. In any manufacturing business, our objective is to have at least 50% gross margin. That means no more than half the value of your product should be spent on operating costs. We are in a manufacturing business. We are manufacturing calves, we are manufacturing lambs, we are manufacturing finished beef. So we need to strive to have our gross margin below 50%. The other side of costs is overheads, or what a lot of economists would call fixed costs. We strive for an overhead ratio less than 33%. That means of the value of your product, we should be spending no more than 33% on overheads. What are overheads? Salaries, depreciation on equipment and facilities, taxes, insurance, utilities, any of those things that you're going to be paying out, whether you are raising 10 cows or 100 cows or 1,000 cows. Those are the overheads. We want that to be less than 33%. The debt equity ratio. Now this is an individual choice. This depends on what is your personal level of risk aversion. I came to understand that I was a grumpy, irritable, kind of a jerk person when I'm in debt. When I'm debt-free, I'm just as happy as can be. I'm sweet, I'm lovable, I'm kind, I'm all those kind of things. So I must have a high level of risk aversion because I don't even know how you express a debt-to-equity ratio where you have no debt. Is that a 1 or is that a 0? I'm either a 1 or a 0. I worry about it so little I don't even know what it is. All right, but some people are willing to highly leverage a little bit of equity to borrow money so you can get rich on somebody else's money. If you are comfortable doing that, and if you have a good business plan, by all means, work with a pretty high debt equity ratio, or pretty high debt equity ratio, because you have confidence that you'll make it work. If you don't have confidence that you can make it work and you're going to be real mean to your kids and stuff like that, don't borrow money. The scale of operation. Now this is an interesting one. And what Burke said about scale of operation is there is an efficiency of scales. You can buy your mineral cheaper if you're buying it for 200 cows compared to 20 cows. Your vaccines are going to be cheaper if you're buying in larger volumes. There's a whole lot of stuff that is cheaper if you're doing it in volume. But Burke also adds, small operations can be profitable if the top 6 factors are right. I know people who make very good money on herds that are less than 100 cows. I know some people in the grass-fed beef business who have 30 to 40 cows, then they, grow the steers and spare heifers out, and they finish them on pasture, sell them at a premium price, and they make a very good living on 40 cows. It can be done. It can be very profitable, but you have to have all these other factors right. Okay, so this next one, this is from a SPA analysis. SPA is Standardized Performance Appraisal. SPA is a record-keeping system for the beef industry developed by the Integrated Resource Management Committee back in the late 70s and 1980s. And, the vision was that this would be the record-keeping system that every beef producer in America used so that we would all be standardized and we could, compare ourselves to how we're performing within our county, within our state, within our region. It was to create benchmarks that said, if you want to be profitable, you better be doing this, 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 this. Well, not everybody uses it, but it's still just about the best database we have. And so Alan Miller, University of Illinois, they did what we would now call a meta-analysis across a lot of SPA records, and they had about 20 different parameters that went into a statistical model to determine how much of variation in profitability across cow-calf herds is explained by this factor, by this factor, by this factor, by this factor, and lo and behold, 57% of the variation in profitability across all of these herds in this data set was explained by feed costs. That is the biggest determinant of profitability in cow-calf enterprises, is feed costs. and it's going to be the largest determinant of profitability across an array of sheep flocks, or goat herds, or bison ranches. All right, 57%. Now, the next most significant factor was depreciation cost. This is equipment and facility depreciation. This is not cow depreciation. We could spend a whole hour talk on cow depreciation. It is, and for whatever reason, naive bunch of academics, I guess, they did not even put cow depreciation in the pool of possible parameters. From 2014 through about 2019, in many operations, cow depreciation exceeded feed costs as the biggest line item annual budget cost. And a lot of people don't even know what cow depreciation is. Some people, they've heard of it and they think it's something economists have made up to make the cattle business look bad. It's not. It is a real cost. I can't go any deeper into it or I won't get through any of the rest of this. Now, two others that I want to look at here. A lot of people really are proud of their weaning weights. And, you know, that's what they want to talk about is weaning weight, weaning weight, weaning weight. Less than 5% of the variation in profitability across this whole data set of cow-calf producers was based on differences in weaning weights within your farm. And Bart did a good job of talking about this. Within his farm, he went from like 370 pounds of weaned calf per cow up to 500 plus within his farm. That made a difference. That made a difference. But as we compare, if we had 1,000 producers who all did what Bart did, it would not sort out as a factor affecting profitability across those groups. Within your ranch, increasing weaning weight, if it is done through management, just not more and more purchased inputs, it does become an important factor. And then the last one I wanted to hit here, so I only have the top 8 in here, but look at that, herds, oh, that hit the wrong button. Herd size, that's scale of operation. Less than 1% of the variation in profitability is explained by the scale of operation. Like I said, you can have 40 cows and make a profit, or you can have 40 cows and lose a ton of money. You can have 14,000 cows and be losing a ton of money, or you could have 14,000 cows and be making a profit. All of these factors that are above that scale of operation has more to do with the profitability than whether you have 40 cows or 14,000 cows. Okay, so the next one we're looking at, I help a lot of clients, and I've had in the 19 plus years that I've been in private business as a consultant, I have worked in 43 of the 50 states. I have clients in 43 of the 50 states. So the smallest client in terms of number of cows that I've worked with had 19 cows. He obviously had another source of income, and the biggest operation I've worked with was 14,000 cows. All right, so I've seen a wide range. I've done financial analysis with a lot of these people, and I looked at it. So if we look at the top 4 costs that I find with my consulting clients, guess what? Winter feeds, they're at the top of the list. Now, we can break out the components of winter feed to identify why it is such a burden. And here's the costs. And this is especially true in the eastern half of the country. Equipment ownership cost is the biggest factor in winter feed. So, as I said, I work with a wide range and scale of operation in ranches, many places in the country. And one of the things that I've done is worked out a model for how many cows does it take to justify owning hay equipment. And we started out, when we first did this, it was for every $5,000 invested in hay equipment, how many cows did it take to pay for it? I first did that analysis back in about 1990. And what we came up with at that time was for every $5,000 invested in hay equipment, it took 60 cows to justify that. Where we are right now is to justify owning a full line of haying equipment takes 600 cows. Probably nobody in this room, is like that, but I bet some of your neighbors have 26 cows and they own a baler, a mower conditioner, a rake, a hay truck, and all that stuff. There's just not enough revenue from those 26 cows to pay the bills. There's not enough revenue from 100 cows to pay those bills. The next factor is equipment operation. And a big part of equipment operation right now is what? Diesel. What about parts? Has the price of parts gone up the last few years? And maybe you can't do all the work and you have to hire somebody to run the rake for you. Can you even find someone to do it? And if you do you have to pay some really crazy price? That's the way it is. Fertilizer. We've already had a couple people talk about the high cost of fertilizer and is it affordable? No, not really. Now, because I work all over, the next one here is irrigation. Obviously, you don't have to worry about that. The only thing you have to worry about is a drought when it doesn't rain. But you don't have to worry about paying an irrigation bill. And then there's land. Whether you lease it or have bought it, land is more expensive than it was 5 years ago. Labor, we already talked about that one. Now it says top 4. There's 3 there. It looks like one is missing right here. And yes, that one is cow depreciation. So these are the top costs that I find. So Burke Teichert, CEO of Deseret, the meta-analysis of SPA data, and my client list all say winter feed cost is their number one cost. So that's what we're going to tackle for the rest of the day. Profit is income minus cost. And I did ask Dr. Halich yesterday if this was the correct definition of profit, and he said that it was. So we're valid here. You can increase profit either by increasing your income or decreasing your cost. Hopefully you can do both. There's 3 basic ways that we increase income. You increase units of production. All right, you got 40 cows and you're losing $300 per cow. Do you want 5 more of them? Nope, that's not going to solve your problem. Until you have a positive gross margin, hopefully greater than 50%, it does not pay to try to increase your units of production. You need to be focused on reducing costs so you increase that gross margin. You can receive a higher price per unit. 40 years ago when I started into this business, there were no premiums in the beef business and you were entirely a price taker. Now we have all kinds of marketing programs. You can be direct marketing. It could be corn-fed freezer beef. It can be grass-fed beef. It can be certified black Angus. It can be in this grid, that grid. There's a lot of opportunities for premiums. And if you're still just throwing calves on the trailer as your weaning and marketing program, you're leaving potentially a lot of money on the table. So look at what you're doing, what market niche might you fit into, and try to capitalize on some of that higher price per unit. We can add enterprises. You've been running cow-calf, but man, you got a lot of weeds coming up in that pasture. Why don't you add a sheep enterprise? Why don't you add a stock enterprise? Why don't you do goats? If right now you're in the goat business, why don't you add a cow or 2 or 20 if you can make money on them? So we can add enterprises. This is how we increase income. And then on the reducing cost side, we have 2 types of costs. We have operating costs, or variable costs as economists like to call them, and we have overheads, or fixed costs as economists. I never say fixed costs because I do not believe they're fixed. They are overheads, and you can eliminate, if you change your business model, you can eliminate overheads. So let's take the big jump and say, we have figured it out. We're going to graze 365 days of the year. So if you're not going to make hay and you're going to graze 365 days of the year, you have just cut out the operating cost of hay making. But if you have truly done that, do you still need to own that extra tractor, the baler, the mower, and all that? No, you don't. So you can sell that equipment and you've eliminated the overhead cost as well. You've got an employee to make that hay, feed that hay, haul the manure and all that. But if you're not making hay, feeding hay, and hauling manure, what do you need that other employee for? You can get rid of an overhead there. So overheads can be eliminated if you can change your business model. All right, now we're going to talk about changing the business. I thought we were going to talk about changing the business model. I bet it's one more slide out there. Okay, grazing is almost always a cheaper way of feeding livestock than a stored forage. And this just lists out the reasons why. Grazing, the livestock are doing the harvesting. If we're doing hay or silage, we're doing the harvesting, and we have all this machine costs associated with it. In terms of yield, and a lot of people have a hard time with this one, but it is absolutely true. Effectively managed pasture will always out-yield hay on a pounds of dry matter harvested per acre basis. So grazing can actually be more productive than haymaking. There's no manure to haul out because the cows are just leaving it out in the field. We look at grazing infrastructure, the stock water development, the fencing we put in on a per acre basis across the farm, that is way, way cheaper than owning tractors, balers, haulers, and all that other stuff. We have a very efficient nutrient cycle with grazing. With hay, we do not, because we're physically moving all those minerals in that hay bale from this location to that location. So we have a broken nutrient cycle going on. All right, now finally we're going to change the business model. So I think I'm going to have 5 points here that are the keys to being successful at year-round grazing. The first one is from the livestock side of it, and it is don't have calves, lambs, and kids born in the winter months. If you talk to ranchers or consultants in what I call the serious grazing countries of the world, Australia, Argentina, Brazil, Uruguay, South Africa, almost New Zealand, they're going to tell you that this is the first step in having a profitable business, is do not calve in winter months. Now, Australia, I said most of it doesn't have bona fide winter. They have a bona fide dry season. And the dry season is just winter that's hot. And so you're not getting green, new feed growing. It's not high quality. And so you look at the deepest trough of your dry season as being the equivalent to winter in this country. So I could have this as don't have calves, lambs, kids born during the winter months or the dry season, okay? And it has to do with the nutritional requirement of the breeding females. So if we think about cows, it takes more feed to make milk. I don't know if you knew that, but it takes more feed to make milk. And so cows come to peak lactation 45 to 60 days after calving. Some cows have a fairly small peak, and then they start falling off in production. If we have genetically selected for cows with a persistent lactation curve, they will come to that peak, and they will hold it for a while before they start falling off. Those ladies eat a whole lot more feed, and they're more expensive to maintain. Ewes come to peak lactation in 20 to 35 days, have a fairly narrow peak. I want to jump back to cows. So with a cow, to have a 365-day calving season, which Bart had said was very important, and Anderson had said it was very important. That cow has to rebreed by day 83 after she has calved. Peak lactation, or I don't want to say peak lactation, a calf changes from being milk dependent to forage dependent typically at about 90 days of age. The modeling that one of our graduate students did back in the early 1990s, it actually came out to day 83 was when the calves shifted to forage dependence. So the most energy intense part of the cow's life is from just before calving to peak lactation, about a 90-day period starting, 3 weeks, 4 weeks before calving and extending to peak lactation. That is when she has her highest energy demand. Now on this graph, I show that cow calving in January just because it's easiest to look at a calendar like that. And so this is a fairly specific graph. It's for a 1,300-pound cow of moderate to superior milking ability. We're going to actually start here in August when the calf has been weaned. The cow has dried off. We are now at the lowest energy requirement she's going to have during the year. And for this particular cow, it's 23 pounds of forage per day. It's going to stay fairly low through mid-gestation, then start climbing. Calf drops, and we go to peak lactation. We get past day 90, and the calf is more less milk dependent, more forage dependent, and her requirement drops off. Now that peak is at 43 pounds. So she has gone from a dry pregnant cow eating 23 pounds a day to a peak lactation cow eating 43 pounds a day. That is an over 80% increase in her energy demand over the course of the season. If you have 100 cows here at this level, you have the equivalent of 180 cows when they're at peak lactation. 80% more feed required at peak lactation compared to being a dry pregnant cow. Let's actually put a lactation curve up here and a forage grass curve. So over here we have the daily milk yield, pounds of milk per day. We have day of the year. We have a group of cows calving on March 1st. The green line here, this is the growth curve. Here's pounds per acre per day of tall fescues fertilized with nitrogen. We put a nitrogen application on just at the onset of green grass emergence, and boom, we get this huge spike in growth. All right? Now, this cow reached peak lactation on May 13th. That's 73 days that it took to get to peak lactation. The peak is at 16 pounds. Now, all of that extra energy, because her energy requirement is shooting up, very rapidly as she goes to peak lactation, all this extra energy that she needs that's occurring before green grass growth starts, which for us was typically between 5th and 10th of April. So we've got 40 days of the highest feed demand of the year occurring when we don't have green grass. We are having to meet that rising demand with expensive stored forage. That is why winter feed costs ends up being the most expensive part of being in the cow-calf business. Now, for some people, this March 1st calving date is late. What if it's in January when they start calving? Then all of this peak is happening before we have growth. Very expensive. Now, here's a set of cows calving on April 15th, so it's 45 days later, and they are calving as green grass is accelerating. So their lactation peak is coming when we have an abundance of low-cost green grass. Other things to note here, peak lactation June 17th, 62 days. So they got to peak lactation 10 days earlier, and the peak's at about 18 pounds per day. These were straight-bred, old-fashioned polled Hereford cows. These are not souped up, crossbred cows crossed with, Gelbvieh or Simmental or something. We had Gelbvieh cross cows, and we had some Gelbvieh cross cows whose peak lactation was between 50 and 60 pounds per day. They should have been in a milk parlor, not out on pasture trying to raise a calf. So if you come to peak lactation quicker and a higher yield, that's in the time of the calf's life when it's really going to benefit, prior to 90 days of age. So there's a 45-day difference between these two sets of calves, right? One set of calves, the average birth date was March 1st. The other ones, it was April 15th. We generally expect calves to gain 2 pounds a day in that first 90 days of life. So 45 days times 2 pounds a day, it says the March 1st calves should have been 90 pounds heavier than the April 15th born calves at any set date in the future. On November 1st, there was, I think it was 42 pounds difference between the two calf groups. So those ones born early coming to peak lactation slower and lower and spending more, and think about the calves now, spending the early part of their lives on probably fairly low quality hay. You spent a whole lot of money to get that 42 pounds of extra weight. It was a very unprofitable undertaking. February is not spring calving, and August is not fall calving. February in almost all of the country is actually winter calving because there's not green, actively growing grass. And August is not the fall because it's still too hot. And cool season grasses have not resumed their fall growth phase. This is the key point, is we want peak lactation and rebreeding to coincide with when we have our peak forage supply. However, end-of-fight infected tall fescue, we have a toxin in there, and in this case, toxicity overrides the normal growth cycle of a cool season grass. In fescue country, if you're predominantly infected fescue, I generally advocate fall calving because tall fescue is very high quality in the fall of the year, even after it frosts. And as soon as it is getting cold, the toxicity of fescue begins to decline. And so we can fall calve, have the fescue at its less toxic time of the year and at a high quality. And so this is not calving in sync with nature, but it is calving in sync with your best forage opportunity. This is a key point, summarizing this. Stock the ranch to your winter grazing capacity, not your summer grazing capacity. Now that means if cow-calf is your centerpiece enterprise, you set your cow number based on how many cows you can graze through the winter. That means you're going to have excess growth in the spring. And if you have excess growth in the spring and you have hay equipment on your place, you're going to be tempted to turn it into hay. And then it becomes an expensive feed source charged against your cow herd. The way we dealt with that is we had a cow-calf herd and we did custom grazing. And our custom grazing program was designed to bring animals in mid to late April and have them gone by early August. They would eat off all the excess forage, and from early August on, whatever acres the custom grazed animals had grazed, that's what we stockpiled to feed our cows in the winter. So we basically had our farm divided into 3 80-acre sections. And each year, one of those 80-acre sections would be dedicated to our custom grazed enterprise, and then when they left, that's what we stockpiled for winter feed. Next year, a different 80-acre block would be custom grazed and winter grazing, and then the third block in the third year. So we ran a 3-year cycle across our place. We never wintered on the same ground 2 years in a row. We never stockpiled the same ground 2 years in a row. But in that stockpiling period, 1/3 of the farm got enough rest each year for all of the clover and the trefoil and the lespedeza to make seed to where it naturally reproduced. When we first started on our farm in Missouri, we overseeded, frost-seeded some clover on almost all the farm every year. Then we went to just overseeding 1/3 of the farm, and when we got into the cycle to allow the natural reseeding, we no longer purchased any seed. On the ranch in Idaho, in 2006, we broadcast red clover, Alside clover, white clover on all 450 acres of under the center pivots. That's the only time we've seeded clover on that place. Since 2006, we have maintained strong legume stands across all of that by using that same approach of each year, allowing a 60 to 75-day recovery period on 1/3 of the irrigated acres, and that's how we've done away with the need for adding clover seed on a regular basis. Provide adequate quantity and quality of standing forage throughout the year. We have 3 basic resources that we use: perennial pastures, annual pastures, and crop residues. So what stockpiling means is allowing growth during the active growing season and just accumulating that in the field for use in the dormant season. We don't turn it into bales. In this part of the country, we wouldn't turn it into swaths. Out in the west, where it doesn't rain in the late summer and fall, we would put it into swaths and leave those swaths out there through all winter and just graze them as needed. But that's what stockpiling is. You can stockpile any kind of pasture, but there are decided advantages to some types over others. Cool season mixtures make better stockpile than do warm season mixtures. Can you stockpile warm season grasses, either native or non-native, for winter feed? Yes, you can, but they have nutritional limitations, and they need to be used earlier in the winter than what we would a cool season. So if we look at the common cool season grasses, top of the list, there's our dear old friend, tall fescue, the wondergrass. You know what there are 5 very good reasons for growing tall fescue. And those 5 reasons are November, December, January, February, and March. That is when tall fescue, even old nasty Kentucky 31, rises to its best, is winter grazing. Now, to get that to be such high quality, we need to take a strategic approach to getting it done. And there's why tall fescue is good. More fall growth than other grasses, very high quality, weather resistant, provides solid footing. When the ground used to freeze for weeks at a time, it was even better solid footing. With it being less cold these days and less long-term freezing in the winter, you really have to rely on the health, vigor, and strength of your tall fescue stand to be able to keep it going in that solid footing category. And that's why I don't like wintering on the same ground 2 years in a row. What we found is we could winter on the ground, we'd tramp it up some because inevitably there'd be some mud, but it would recover. If we wintered 2 years in a row on the same ground, then we started to see the sod break down. We started to see weed encroachment. So that's why we like to keep moving them. Going to the quality of tall fescue, this is a study we did at Linnaeus. And so on the bottom here, we have 2-week or half-month increments. First half of November, second half of November, December second half, so on. This is percent crude protein, and this shows the quality that can be in stockpiled tall fescue. So the yellow bars are continuous grazing, and there was research in Kentucky, being done by UK on stockpiling tall fescue way back into the 1950s, and in Missouri in the 1960s. And almost all of those early stockpiling trials, one of the conclusions was there is a steady decline in forage quality through the winter. But all of that work was done either with set stocking or very slow rotation. So giving them 3 weeks at a time, 4 weeks at a time, something like that. The green bars here, this is controlled grazing, where the animals are being allocated a new strip every 3 days. So each one of these bars represents 5 3-day allocations. And what you see is there is not a steady decline of forage quality over the winter. It's not until we get into the first part of the year that it really starts to drop off. What this line from the continuous grazing represents is not a weather-related deterioration of feed quality. It is simply the animal selecting the highest protein material out of the sward because they have access to the entire field. And the second line on a cow's position description, which I don't know if you've ever read the cow's position description, it says find the best bite of feed that you can. That is her job, and she is very good at doing that. And so she selectively grazes all the highest protein material out, and you end up with what looks like a declining forage quality profile. But it's really the reflection of animal selection. So the next one is the proper length of recovery period. And what we found in Missouri, and there's plenty of other research to support it, that if you have grazed a pasture down and then you start letting it regrow for stockpile, you will hit the maximum yield that that field will carry in about 60 to 75 days of stockpiling. So that's our recommendation. If your goal is maximum yield out there for just bulk feed, 60 to 75 days will get you there. If you want a higher quality stockpile, you shorten the period. Like if you need some of your acres that you're going to put your weaned calves on and say, man, I want that to be higher quality, just stockpile it for 50 days. You will have less feed, but it will be a more higher energy, higher protein feed. Now, warm season grasses, we cut that down to 40 to 50 days, depending on what species we're talking about. The native warm season grasses, your big blue stem Indian grass, things like that, we'd still do those 60, 75 days, but if you're stockpiling Bermuda grass or Bahia grass, you don't want 60, 75 days of rank growth out there because it's going to be crap feed. But you can take Bermuda grass, stockpile it for 40, 45 days, and still have some nutritional value that'll carry a dry, pregnant cow. You might have to feed a protein supplement, you might not. That's the time you do a forage test to see what you actually have available there. Stand condition, the shorter stubble you start from and the more uniform stubble you start from, the higher the quality of the stockpile grazing in the winter is going to be. So we generally like getting it grazed down or clipped. I generally don't advocate clipping. I would rather accomplish this with grazing, but we want to get it down to a 3 to 5 inch residual. Then you let it start regrowing. And because I give this talk in other places besides Kentucky, I have irrigation management in here. Your irrigation management is you pray for rain. But to really grow a lot of stockpile yield, you do have to have precipitation in August, September, and now I could shift that and say September, October because of the seasons being later. And the value of water, if you have a healthy stand of fescue, have it starting from that 3 to 5 inch stubble, every inch of water, and adequate fertility, functional biology, every inch of water that that stand receives will translate to 300 to 500 pounds of dry matter forage. When I was in grad school at UK, it wasn't my project, it was one of the other grad students, I was helping with it. In the winter 1979, 1980, it rained in the fall, and we had stockpile fields that were 5 tons per acre, 10,000 pounds of stockpiled forage out there. Now that was in response to, I don't remember if it was 60 or 80 units of nitrogen, but yeah, we measured 5 tons per acre stockpiled feed. That feeds a lot of cows. You want to know how many cows that'll feed? 385 animal unit days per acre is what that is. Nitrogen availability. I once heard the definition of an agronomist was someone who never ceases to be amazed that nitrogen makes grass grow. Yeah, nitrogen makes grass grow. So we have to have nitrogen available in the soil. And I generally list these as, my preferred sources. First is legumes in the mixture, pumping nitrogen into the system, adding manure, broiler litter, hog effluent, dairy manure, whatever. And then the last one is commercial nitrogen fertilizer. The more I hang around with Ray, the more I believe that I got to slap another line in here that just says functional biology. Because, and we were having this conversation, I don't remember if it's Jimmy and I or Ray and I think it's you and me, Jimmy, in the car. We were talking about the amount of legumes present in the pasture. And, I've long been an advocate of 30 to 50%. And if you ask me what's the right amount, I'll give the smart aleck answer, 42%. And that 42%, I think, is based on experience on soils that don't have functional biology. I think if we really have functional biology, because Alan Williams, he talks about just 15 to 20. And I always thought, that's low, that's low. But I think Alan has been working with soils with functional biology longer than I have, and that might be why he's at 15 to 20%, because with functional biology, it gives us the equivalent response of what 30 to 50% of legumes growing through the entire season puts to us, which is the equivalent of about 60 to 80 units of urea being applied. Those are all kind of equivalent factors. 60 to 80 units of urea right now is $60 to $80. Or you can have legumes, and as I said, on the ranch in Idaho, it's been 16 years since we added any legumes to the mixture, and we have a few weak spots, but for the most part, we have acceptable legume all the way through it. That's a low cost approach. I better move along. Oh, no, I'm not going to move along. I'm just going to talk about it in greater depth. So this is another project. This is another project we did in Missouri, and we did this looking at stockpiling tall fescue with a variety of interseeded legumes with and without nitrogen. So these dark bars here, the plot got 60 pounds of nitrogen per acre. The lighter blue got 0. Now, you look at this one that has no legume. We can't kill red clover in North Missouri with 2,4-D anymore. They have been sprayed so many fields for thistles with 2,4-D for so long that had red clover in it, it's just dying. Okay. The red clover won't die anymore. So to prepare for this trial, because we wanted a fescue field that had no legumes in it, we sprayed it twice with 2,4-D, and it still, when it came to November and time to start harvesting these plots, it was still 30% red clover. So this no legume is just another set of replications of the red clover treatment. All right, so you look at this, and you can see that's averaging about 3,500 pounds per acre, 1.75 tons per acre stockpiled feed. The nitrogen fertilizer salesman is going to tell you, you got that 3,500 pounds because you put on the 60 units of N. The only thing you got due to the 60 units of N is the marginal difference between each of those bars. And that's about 400 pounds. So less than 7 pounds of added forage per acre from that nitrogen fertilizer at today's prices absolutely doesn't pay. When nitrogen was 35 cents a pound, it didn't pay. So that's why I'm such a strong advocate of legumes as your source of nitrogen in there. And there's that 30 to 50% that I advocated for a long time. Now, these are the legumes that we have found over the years to be most suitable for stockpiling. Unfortunately, Alsike clover in the Midwest is a pretty wimpy clover. Under irrigation out west, it is a powerhouse. I couldn't believe that Alsike clover will do this. It's my favorite clover out there. Why it's so good for stockpiling, it has very high stem digestibility, and freezing weather doesn't knock the leaves off. Bird's foot trefoil, also high stem digestibility, pretty good leaf retention, and there are parts of Kentucky, I know, where trefoil grows. We used it quite a bit in research out at Spindletop, there at Lexington. So it should grow around here. You just have to hold your mouth right when you seed it. Red clover and white clover are probably your strong suit right here. And so these are the ones you're most likely going to be using in your pastures that you're going to stockpile. Sandfoin, I don't know if anybody ever grew sandfoin in Kentucky, but alfalfa. Alfalfa is the bottom of the list because it freezes, the leaves fall off, and it's got lousy stem digestibility. The annual pastures. We can do winter annual pastures. They extend our grazing season later into the fall. They get us out on pasture earlier in the spring. But a real key thing is they give us dairy quality or finishing quality feed at a time of year we normally would not have it. So if you're in the direct market grass-fed beef business and you're having a hard time getting your animals finished, in the fall because you're running out of quality perennial grass, the annuals can really help you extend that season. All the cereal grains and annual ryegrass, that's generally what we're talking about. One of my favorite things to plant in the fall is oats, annual ryegrass, and then, the vetch or clovers that we'll come to in a bit. The ryegrass will survive the winter and it'll thrive in the fall. The oats will come faster in the fall because they actually want to go ahead and mature. And so oats will give you more feed on the front side of winter. You can use that up, and then the ryegrass comes on in the spring. Crimson, all of these clovers here, I think every one of these will grow in most of Kentucky. Nice to have in your mixture. Brassicas, the turnips, tillage radishes, Swedes. I can't think of a reason why they wouldn't grow here. I think all of these will grow here. And you know what? You can throw all of those in together and have a whole big gamish, and that whole big gamish is called what? Crazy Rays mixture. Summer annuals, there's another option, and you might think, well, they're good in the summertime. They give us dairy or finishing quality forage when it's not usually available in the summer months, but the other thing that it can do is give you a tremendous pile of dry cow feed in the wintertime. You can stockpile and graze summer annuals in the winter months. When they are green and actively growing, they're high energy, moderate protein, so it's good for stockers, finishing dairy. Later in the season, when the sunlight is less intense, the days are shorter, this stuff can still look green, and you say, man, that's still real good feed, but you know what? It's lower in energy because there's not enough sunlight to create as many sugars there. So it becomes late lactation cow feed, replacement heifers, dairy, dry cows. All right, summer annual grasses, top of the list. Corn. Corn is just a great big summer annual grass. Then we have crabgrass, sorghum sedans, millets, teffs, the weedy grasses, foxtail, barnyard grass. Graze vegetative, they're high quality feed. So corn, big summer annual grass. You can graze corn green, and it is finishing quality feed. Of course, if you're certified American Grass-Fed Association certification, you can't graze this stuff because it's grain. But if you're doing just local natural beef, or you're just trying to accelerate the growth of steers headed for the feedlot, green corn is an amazingly high quality feed. You can leave corn standing, and you can feed fall calving cow-calf pairs on it. You can corn finish animals on it. I remember when I was in graduate school, Tim Taylor took us out to some farm where in 1977, this guy was finishing steers on standing corn, a man ahead of his time. We can combine cover crops and standing corn by flying on the cover crop seed just as the corn is starting to dry out. We generally up the recommended seeding rates because it's flown on, and it just it will do quite well on the residual fertilizer left behind from the corn crop. And then you have a feed out there that is potentially usable by any class of livestock. We have corn stalks to put some dry matter, some roughage into the rumen as they eat this lush stuff, gives us a pretty balanced diet. All right, tillage. This is how people used to do this. You work the ground. It's effective, but it's expensive. It's expensive financially, but also biologically. Every time we till the ground, we're destroying soil life. So, and tillage is expensive, 20 to 100 bucks an acre. We end up with erosion potential there if we get those fall and winter rains. And if it's wet in the spring, that tilled ground does not have the structure to support the weight of the animals, and so we just churn it up. We waste a lot of feed. And so we have been advocating no-till. All of these annual forages, we want to see them done no-till. And that helps. And the reason I first went that way is it just makes the ground more stable for grazing it. But now I know that it's also saving the functional biology. Here's some of the keys to successful no-tillage. Timeliness. There's kind of two philosophies here. One is, well, I'm going to wait till it rains, then I'll seed it. And so you wait till it rains, and it rains, and it rains, and it rains, and you miss the window of opportunity. The other approach, which is the one I prefer, is the faith-based approach, and this is where you know what your optimum seeding window is, and you put that seed in the ground, whether it's wet or dry, and you just hope that it rains. And relatively high percentage of the time, it does end up raining, and it gives you some feed. This year may not have been the year to do that. Adequate fertility seed placement. There are more stand failures with no-till seeding from putting the seed too deep than probably any other factor. So you got to be able to control your equipment, and you got to put that seed where it needs to be, and then it's getting the slot closed. And that's kind of a soil type based thing. We have crop residues. Corn stalks are the main one that most people are focused on. I don't have a picture of milo stalks in here because I don't think there's much milo grown here, but grain sorghum, dwarf grain sorghum, milo, that is the best crop residue for grazing in my view. We generally expect 30 to 60 AUDs per acre, depending on the crop yield. Now it says irrigated corn will provide 2 times that much. Well, you don't irrigate here, so. But if out in Nebraska now they routinely grow 260, 280, even 300 bushel corn crops, and the stalks from that make a whole lot of feed. We use controlled grazing to ration out the corn, because if you give them a big field, they're going to go through, eat all the corn out first, then they'll eat the leaves, they'll nibble on the husk, and they mostly don't eat the stalks. So do controlled grazing, and you will ration out the grain and leaves, and you will get them to eat a higher percentage of stalks. We already talked about overseeding. The cool season covers in there to put greater value on those fields. The controlled grazing here, to me, any winter feed should be strip grazed, ration it out. Again, 4-year study from Linnaeus, Missouri. When we compared giving 14 days worth of feed to giving 3 days worth of feed at a time, we got 40% more grazing days per acre with the 3-day strip graze compared to 14 days. When I first came to the station at Linnaeus, grazing stockpiled fescue was already a standard management operational practice at the research station, but they were only getting 50 to 60 animal unit days per acre harvested off of stockpile. They were doing typically 2 to 3 week allocations. At the time I left Linnaeus 22 years later, we were routinely harvesting 100 to 120 animal unit days per acre off of stockpiled pasture. Okay, this table just shows to get a particular utilization rate on the standing forage, what the allocation is going to be. If we move them every day, we can harvest 80% of the physical volume of that forage. And in the dormant season, that's not going to hurt the plant. Set stocking, it's only 40%. That just clearly illustrates you will get twice as many days of grazing if you do daily moves compared to set stock. In the winter, we also, especially on warm season grasses, we use the length of the grazing period to control the utilization of protein out of the stockpiled forage. Ruminants only need a protein put into the rumen basically twice a week to have functional digestion. Monogastrics, pigs, dogs, people, we have to eat intact protein every day. We already saw that one. So shorter grazing periods, less opportunity for selective grazing. That's my front porch view, by the way. Stock consume the good, the bad, and the ugly all together. You get more value out of whatever you have stockpiled. So strip grazing gives us, it preserves winter feed supply deeper into the winter, preserves quality deeper into the winter. That raises body condition through the winter, and that gives us overall better performance through the season. Another thing you have to have is livestock and know how to work for their living. This is Helmville, Montana. Snow cover like that 3 to 4 months of the year. That's what the cows are expected to graze through every day. And they do it because they've learned to do it. This is in upstate New York. Guy winter grazing cows. Central Idaho. Missouri. Guess what? If you can winter graze in Montana, New York, Idaho, you ought to be able to do it in Kentucky. And then you need to have a positive attitude. If you don't think this will work, it will not. If you think it'll work, you will find a way. Year-round grazing, to me, is more about attitude than environment. In assessments that I've done, I think there's only about 15% of the land area of the United States where year-round grazing is probably not possible. Pacific Northwest Coast, the Great Lakes region, and some parts of the Northern Plains and the Northern Rockies. All the rest of the U.S., to me, year-round grazing should be the norm, not the exception. I didn't bring it in my books to sell, but there's an ad for them. You can go to our website online, AmericanGrazingLands.com, buy all those books and others. And then there is my contact information. So if you want to jot down our office number, my email, our website, or take the picture. People don't jot stuff down anymore, though I see people doing it. You take a picture of it. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. All right.
One back here, Jim. Jim, how are you getting posts in some of those areas like in Idaho and ground?
Good question. How are we getting posts in the ground? There is only one step-in post that I use in the winter. That is the true O'Brien treadline. I've been using that post since 1987. Not specifically that post, but I do have some O'Brien posts that are over 25 years old. Okay, so what makes it work? It has a 3/16 diameter spike on it. Some step-in posts are, I'm not going to use that, are 3/8 of an inch. There is a principle of water flow. Double the diameter, you quadruple the flow. Well, on a step-in post, double the diameter, you quadruple the resistance of getting it in the ground. On the O'Brien post, that is a high tensile steel rod. It is not cold roll. So the way that I actually put posts into the ground in the wintertime, you don't try to stomp them in, you don't just push them in, you kind of rock them in. I have yet to resort to a cordless drill or anything else to make a pilot hole to put a post in. We have evaluated almost every step-in post manufactured anywhere in the world. because we are in the electric fencing business. And when I use a half a dozen different types of posts in the summer months, but when we get to freezing time, I will put all of those other posts away, and the only thing I'll use the remainder, of the season here is going to be the true O'Brien. Okay, any other one? Yes, ma'am. Slow down just a bit and say it again. Okay. All right. Yes, we get reels frozen up some of the time. I just wait till later in the day, usually, to move the cattle. But if you get the reel working, and I'll just wrap it, knock on it, with a step-in post, or bang it on my leg or something to get the ice off to where I can start cranking it. Then what I do, because if you're in that situation, your poly wire probably is just sheathed in ice the whole way. I take the O'Brien post, hook the wire in the lowest hook, and just walk along the wire, and you can knock all that ice off usually with that. It does mean that I'm making another trip to come back and reel it up, but that's how I clean it. It's just the bottom hook on the O'Brien post. Okay?
Is the mix between like the cold grass and the hot grass, like you have addicts that are dedicated just for one or the other, or you just try to mix half and half?
Okay. What the lady asked was, do I have some pastures that are cool season, some pastures that are warm season, or are they mixed? When we were on the farm in Missouri, I liked them mixed. We had, as we changed our grazing management, we started from pastures that were over 80% just fescue. You couldn't tell there's really much of anything else in there. And after 3 to 5 years of daily rotation, and I have been on daily moves since 1988, we did it in Missouri, did it in Idaho. And we just saw native grasses, the blue stems, Indian grass, paspalums, reappearing in those pastures. So we ended up with a lot of pastures that were mixed. And so the key then is just timing of grazing and what level of defoliation you put on it. And, just the way you separate the sheeps and the goats in the graziers, not the grazers, the graziers, is who can manage a pasture to maintain the warm and cool season balance. If you can, over years, maintain warm season, cool season balance in a pasture, you have achieved master grazer status. We did it for years, and they were our most productive pastures. If you start tracking AUDs per acre harvested or cow days per acre harvested, that's what we found was our most productive pastures were the ones that were the balanced mixtures.
A quick follow-up. Do you have like a targeted height where you say, okay, that paddock is ready?
I actually go by leaf stage, and so, you could have in a real lush spring, you could have grass this tall, but the tiller only has 2 leaves out on it. That's not in a positive carbohydrate balance. That is not ready to graze. You might, another time, have grass that's this tall and there's 4 leaves per tiller. That's ready to graze. So it isn't about height. It's how many leaves are present on the tiller. If you have fewer than 2 leaves, you're definitely in phase 1. If you have more than 3 leaves, you're definitely in phase 2. 2 to 3 leaf is kind of the transition, and that's the delicate area of deciding whether you should start grazing or not. My preference is to get 4 to 5 leaves out per tiller. There are some cool season grasses that won't get to 5 leaves before they head. Most warm season grasses, they might get 7, 8, 9, 10 leaves on them. And for warm season grasses, I'm usually looking at 4 to 5 leaves to start. And then, so we do a lot of grazing at 6, 7, 8 leaves. See, now they want to go.
Let's take 3 more. We got 2 here.
All right.
We've had problems if we want to stockpile that the warm season wants to choke out. How do we avoid that?
What warm season are you talking about?
Crabgrass or what?
Not crabgrass, it's another grass, kind of broadly looking.
Oh, Johnson grass? No. Okay. Okay. If you know that's a problem that you have in a particular field, I would, because warm season grasses, as soon as the nights are getting shorter and a little bit cool, they're going to stop. So whereas I may have said, let's start stockpiling on August 15th, you might push that back to September 5th or something and put one more high impact grazing on it. And if you can get the warm season grazed off there to the latter part of August, 1st of September, the fescue probably isn't really kicking in for its fall growth yet. But after September 5th, it's probably going to go. And so if you take the warm season grass off and the sunlight is getting preferentially to the fescue, it should take off faster and be able to maintain itself. Anytime you get into that warm season competition situation, yeah, the solution is push the start of your stockpiling period a little later into the season. Yes, you. Mm-hmm. On the big blue stem? On big blue stem, I would recommend that you try to get it grazed down to probably about 8 inches by or late July, 1st of August, and then let it regrow from there. And if you let it regrow from there, you're going to get mostly leaves. You will get some seed heads. See, warm season grasses head in response to accumulated heat days, just like corn does. And so if you can graze it off and have a lot of those potential seed heads bitten off, and it's more vegetative tillers coming up, there's not going to be enough heat days left in the year for it to drive the head up. And so you're going to have mostly a leafy regrowth, and that is way better fall grazing than headed out blue stem would be. No. No. Shouldn't. All right, and there's one last one further back. I think being at the end of the session here, that's a fairly long explanation, but I will tell you, if you send me an email with that question, I will give you a specific answer back to it. All right.
Let's thank Jim.